It's not that Donald Trump is too much of a criminal to stay out of trouble. It's that the Donald Trump is just too oppressed and there's just too many witch hunts against him for him to escape. And the American people are going to realize this, and they're going to favor him. And this is actually a W for Trump. I want to talk about Trump getting arrested tomorrow. So this right here is footage of Donald Trump's famous Trump jet flying to New York City from West Palm Beach, Florida, in order to turn himself in for over 30 criminal charges. It's specifically 34 criminal charges. Let's look at the moment, at this famous moment in history, as Donald Trump has managed in one term to become the first president indicted after office.
Welcome back. You are watching the former president's plane take off, heading up in the air and heading back to his home state of New York. Certainly not the kind of homecoming that he had ever imagined when he went back from Florida to New York, but he is heading back on a historic flight. Again, not necessarily a part of history that Donald Trump or any former president would want to make, but nonetheless, that is exactly what he is doing, and one that he is trying to make the most of, going back to face justice and to face a prosecutor who will formally unseal an indictment that has already been voted on and filed.
This is very weird, man. You know, as much as I knew that Donald Trump is engaged in like criminal behavior, and there's like 4 separate investigations going on into him right now. There's like one for obstruction of justice, and there was an announcement yesterday. Actually, no, I think it was early this morning. There was an announcement that the DOJ is looking into obstruction for the documents in his home, the classified documents that he was improperly storing in his home, which is a massive distinction from the separate probe, which is going on into Biden on the documents that were in his garage, which were of, not only were there less documents, but also there was no obstruction. That when those documents were identified, they were turned over. Where in this case, it seems to be that they asked for the documents from Trump. He then moved the documents around, picked the ones he wanted to keep, gave the DOJ some documents before eventually they determined that he still has others, and that's what ended up causing the raid on Trump's home. And that's on top of the other investigation into election interference when he was making the call down into Georgia, and Brad Raffensperger tried to intimidate him into quote unquote finding the votes to make him win the 2020 election. There's so many different investigations going on. There's different like civil lawsuits that we're not even talking about. There's so much stuff going around with Trump and investigations into his criminal behavior. And this seems to be the one that has caught up with him first. There's a decent chance that the obstruction stuff, when it comes to the documents that he improperly stored in his home, which gotta bring up the irony of Donald Trump criticizing Hillary Clinton, saying she should be locked up for the improper storing of documents, emails. He then goes into office, increases the penalty for violations of the Presidential Records Act before then violating the Presidential Records Act. There should have been nobody in the country who is more familiar with the Presidential Records Act than the person who criticized Hillary for years for violating said act and then increased the penalty for said act. If I increased the penalty for drunk driving and then got caught drunk driving, that should be a much larger scandal than it seems to have become for Donald Trump. Anyway, Donald Trump is facing the music for this first, and a lot of people have put out the idea before, and I don't even want to get into the, oh, is this a just case? Is all the evidence laid out? I've already talked about this on my channel before, and I'm of the conclusion currently that we just need to wait for the indictment to be unsealed and so we can all see it as the public before jumping into any conclusions, because all of the conclusions I'm seeing people jump to online is all stuff that they don't know, and they're just making guesses based upon information they do not have, and I do not want to do that right now. Instead, I want to talk about what we do have, and I want to talk about polling numbers and how the American people are reacting to Donald Trump being indicted for the Stormy Daniels case. And many people said, and you saw this a lot with the kind of TikTok cope with a lot of conservatives saying, well, you know, and I think Benny Johnson also said this, Donald Trump is the new Tupac. You know, he's going to be the new Nelson Mandela. He is now a political prisoner. He is being politically persecuted. And this is going to make him more popular than ever. Everybody is going to buy his mugshot and put it on t-shirts. And maybe it is true that his t-shirts of his mugshot, which we still don't 100% know or don't know if he's going to be getting a mugshot or not. I hope he does. It'd be really funny. And I think he should be treated no differently just because he's the president when it comes to stuff like that. There was this overall idea that Donald Trump is going to be immensely popular because of this, that the American people are going to have the wool over their eyes, take it off, and they're finally going to be shown the truth about the deep state, the truth about the corruption, the truth about all this stuff. Because it's just too blatant. It's not that Donald Trump is too much of a criminal to stay out of trouble. It's that Donald Trump is just too oppressed. And there's just too many witch hunts against him for him to escape. And the American people are going to realize this, and they're going to favor him. And this is actually a W for Trump. I have something to tell you guys. I said at the time that this would not be a W for Trump, that the investigation into Hillary Clinton, which wasn't even an indictment, not 1/10 of what we're seeing right here, going into the 2020 election, ending up undercutting her campaign and contributing to her losing. When there was only a 70,000 vote difference in the states that mattered between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, that investigation ended up having a lot of weight. And so it was hard for me to imagine that an indictment, which is a lot further than just an investigation, is going to have a lot of weight going into 2024, especially with moderates. And I am here to tell you that I was right. All of the polling data seems to indicate semi-broad public support for Donald Trump being indicted, and that they believe that Donald Trump did commit crimes. Now, there is some data suggesting that there's a large percentage of the American people that believes this is also politically motivated, but that percentage also has a chunk of those people saying that even if it's somewhat politically motivated, it's the president of the United States. It's impossible to see it not being at least somewhat politically motivated. We still support the indictment. And that is really interesting. That is really interesting data. So let's go through this data. This is one piece of data. This is just from ABC, and I'm going to go through multiple data sources to show you that either a broad majority or a plurality support the indictment. This is from ABC News. This is the most modest prediction so far. Plurality of the public supports Trump indictment poll. An ABC News poll shows that 45% think Trump should have been charged. A plurality of Americans thinks former President Donald Trump should have been charged by the Manhattan grand jury with a history-making indictment, yet a near equal amount of people believe the charges against him are politically motivated, according to a new ABC News ISPOS poll. So that indicates that a certain percentage of the people who believe he should have been charged also believe that it could have been politically motivated. According to the poll, 45% think Trump should have been charged with a crime in the case, whereas 32% don't think so, and 23% say they don't know. So these 23% can be some of the based information people. Okay, these are the information people who are, well, I'm giving them a little too much credit. These are the people who are waiting for the indictment to come out, for it to be unsealed, so they can look at all the information, they can look at all the evidence, and then they can give their opinion. Or they're people who don't pay attention. Probably an equal percentage of both. I'm being very generous. But 45% to 32%, that's a significant difference. That's a 13% plus positive difference for those who think Trump should be charged with the crime in this case. With 23% saying, I don't know, it's not going to take a lot of convincing of those people to make this a majority of Americans. And that plurality is already a steep difference with 13%. Democrats are, unsurprisingly, rallying behind the grand jury's decision. Almost 9 in 10 Democrats, 88%, think Trump should have been charged in the investigation by the Manhattan DA, which has been probing a $130,000 hush money payment made to an adult film actress, Stormy Daniels, who alleges the two had an affair. Trump has long denied these claims. Compared with by the way, can I just throw out there that Donald Trump, despite everything, still denies that he had an affair with Stormy Daniels. We have evidence of the money chaining hands. We know that this happened. And this is not even a case about whether he had an affair. This is a case about an illegal hush money payment and possible campaign finance law violations. We don't know the full scale of it. We're still waiting for it to be unsealed. But even with him on the door of everybody to face charges based upon that, he still denies that he even had an affair in the first place. Compared with Democrats, Republicans are less united. While a majority, 62%, say Trump should not be charged, 1 in 5 Republicans say they don't know, and 16% say they should have been charged, per the ABC News is Post poll conducted using the Knowledge Panel. Independents see more of a split, with 2 in 5 saying he should be charged, 32% saying he shouldn't have been, and 27% saying they don't know. Big picture, half of Americans believe the charges are very or somewhat serious, while 32% say they are not too serious or not serious at all. A smaller portion, 14%, say they don't know. Considered among party lines, 87% of Democrats say the charges are very or somewhat serious, and 6 in 10 of Republicans say the charges are not too serious or not serious at all. Some members of the public may be waiting to see what precisely the indictment is connected to, what specific charges Trump will face. Former President Trump has been charged with around 24 counts, including felonies. Sources familiar with the sealed indictment told ABC News. The indictment will be unsealed when Trump appears in the court in New York on Tuesday, so we're going to find out this information tomorrow. At the same time, a plurality of Americans, 47%, say that the charges against the former president are politically motivated, echoing the sentiment from top GOP figures. An even larger majority of Republicans, 79%, hold that view, as does a plurality of independents, 48%. As expected, 64% of Democrats take the opposite view, though a far cry from the overwhelming opposition. Okay, you get the idea from here. Now, some of you might say, Dylan, while this data is somewhat damning, this is only one piece of data. You cannot extrapolate that the American people seem to be okay with the indictment or support the indictment just from this. Hell, this piece even says it's a plurality. You're going to need more data. Don't worry. We have more data. Let's move over to CNN, which have also done their own polling on the indictment.
No doubt.
And they've talked about how they have found a majority of Americans also support the indictment.
So there is no doubt the decision to indict has elicited a strong reaction across the political spectrum. New CNN polling shows many Americans believe politics played at least some role in the decision to indict Donald Trump. Take a look at this. 52% say politics played a major role, and you see 23% say a minor role. Some think no role, and there's also an element of people who still, they really are not sure. CNN's Jeff Zeleny joins us now for much more on this. Jeff, many people think that politics played some role in this indictment, but how many people that were polled actually approve of the indictment?
Okay, this is so interesting. Of course, you cannot divorce politics from any of this because we are talking about the former president here, who, of course, is a current candidate for the White House. But when you look at the findings of our new poll, take a look at this. 60% of Americans, some 6 in 10 of Americans, support the overall indictment here, and 40% are against it. That's largely driven by sort of some common views from Republicans. Of course, they're opposed, Democrats support, but independents largely follow this rule. So that is so interesting that 60% support. And we should be clear, we do not know exactly what is in the indictment. This is just based on the broad confines of a familiar storyline of a hush.
CapTBT gave Ptolemy a Tier 1 subscription. I think we should all celebrate Trump's indictment by eliminating another white name in site chat. Get fucking Trump.
Get fucking Trump? What is get fucking Trump? What is that? Like, get him? Like, we should, like, get him? Like, we, like form, like, an angry mob chasing Frankenstein, but do it for Donald Trump, for the Orange Man? Either way, Captain TBT, thank you so much for the Tier 1. I appreciate it. Also, I saw people redeeming story time. Okay, we gotta at least wait until the segment's over. Okay, here's a story time. I remember when I was working at. Let me just get this out quickly. I wasn't working, but I was president of my school's Model UN, and we were going to the UN building in Washington D.C. to do a conference. I was going to represent, I believe it was Hungary at this conference, and the topic was refugees. So my job was to be a terrible, terrible human being. Anyway, Donald Trump's Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, made a surprise appearance at the Model UN. And I remember, and because I was like a young buck, you know, and I was like, whoa, a politician. So I had this moment of like, wow, oh my God, I know him, because I was a foreign policy nerd. Oh my gosh, that's a Secretary of State. That's Rex Tillerson. And then I went from that to, oh, that's Rex Tillerson. Oh, it's Rex Tillerson. Because at the end of the day, he's an oil exec. He's an oil company exec. That's the reason he got his position. He's not a particularly impressive person when it comes to like foreign policy expertise. I mean, he might have been better than some of the other people Donald Trump picked, but that's an extremely low bar when you consider the type of caliber of the person that he picked. Like Michael Flynn, for example, who is now an out-and-out QAnoner. So there's a story time. The time my childlike innocence came crashing upon the shores of reality.
Money payment that we've been talking about for more than 6 years now. So 6 in 10 Americans support that. But there is so much more interesting findings in our poll this morning that really speaks to the dynamic of the politics going into this, Kate.
And one thing we see is that maybe the only unsurprising thing in this is that it shows that the nation remains so divided, especially when it comes to Donald Trump. But what are you seeing in this poll in terms of the overall impact, the impact on the country, the impact on democracy?
We should talk about the historic nature of this. Yes, this is really a run-of-the-mill indictment, but a former president has never been indicted and arraigned. So the next 48 hours are going to see something in the country we have never seen before. So when you talk about democracy, take a look at these numbers. What do you think about the strength of democracy? And 31% of Americans say that it strengthens it. 31% say it weakens. 23% it has no effect at all. So divided. Americans clearly divided among party lines and familiar lines on this. But this is a historic proceeding, no question, so we cannot not take stock of all of that. But there is no doubt as we go forward here, democracy is at the core of this, and he obviously has other cases pending in Georgia and in federal court as well. So this is.
So I do want to bring this forward. It isn't too shocking to me that a majority of Americans support the indictment. It's not very difficult to argue to somebody that if somebody's a powerful person, like the president, like I think this might be hard for some people who are big Trump guys to understand, but Trump is an elite. Trump is part of the elite class. He's extremely wealthy. He's a former president of the United States. He's offered tons and tons of money to speak at certain events. I mean, he has a gigantic base of people who gives him tons and tons of cash. He is an elite. And being an elite, many people want to see him held accountable if he violates the law. There is supposed to be this thing in this country where everybody, no matter their income or background, are supposed to be equal under the law. Now, we know in practicality that often does not happen, but that's still a desire from the American people to have that type of equality under the law. And so if somebody rich and powerful violates the law, there's nothing the American people love to watch more than watching that person get torn the fuck down. From torn apart like rabid animals. There's nothing more the American people like than to watch powerful, successful men get torn asunder. And when we go look in Donald Trump's case, considering the way he has conducted himself, it is not that difficult to make a legal case against him for him to be torn asunder. Even if the case doesn't win, it's very easy to build the case, considering how many different legal kerfluffles he's gotten in, whether it is what happened in Georgia with the Brad Raffensperger call, or whether it is any of his impeachments, whether it is obstruction of justice when it comes to the illegal storing of documents in violation of the Presidential Records Act, or the illegal payments to Stormy Daniels. And so I think a lot of Trump supporters are unable to understand exactly why this is getting so much support from the American people. I do also think that after so many scandals Donald Trump has been in, how many different times he's gotten in trouble with the law to one degree or another, it isn't that difficult to convince many Americans that the dude violated the law to a point where maybe he should actually be charged with something. If Donald Trump is always violating the law, whether it's in Georgia, whether it's with the Presidential Records Act, or in this case, Stormy Daniels, maybe he should be held to account for that. So I don't think it's that terribly difficult to convince people of that. Then again, it's also not terribly difficult to understand an ulterior narrative. And the ulterior narrative is Joe Biden and the deep state want to undermine Donald Trump as he runs for president again in 2024. And that this is terrible and awful. Now, did we hear any of these people speaking up when Hillary Clinton had the investigation into her reopened going into the 2020 presidential election? No, not at all. Donald Trump loved it, loved every second of it. But it isn't that difficult to see that and to come to the conclusion that this could be politically motivated. Definitely when you look at the history of who Alvin Bragg is a Democrat, the Manhattan DA is a Democrat. There isn't any evidence that this is motivated by political motivations. When it comes to the idea, like hard evidence, like I am doing this for this one political reason, but that doesn't mean the suspicion has gone away or that there might not be evidence in the future that comes out that shows that this could have political motivations. This is part of the reason why I am praying to God Alvin Bragg is not just some opportunist. I know others voted to push this process forward as well, and so I'm hoping that the judgment of all of them comes together and they did not pull the trigger on something that's going to actually turn Donald Trump into a martyr. I'm hoping that's not the case. I think it probably isn't the case, but you never know because, again, we haven't seen the indictment unsealed and we won't see that until tomorrow. But my main point I want us all to take away from this is that the idea that this indictment is necessarily going to turn Donald Trump into some bad boy hero icon who, you know, is charging against the establishment and is getting punished by it, by being persecuted for his politics, that has not clicked with the majority of Americans. In fact, the majority of Americans think that's bullshit. And the people who thought that this was going to certify Donald Trump's victory in 2024 were sorely mistaken. And also, that's based upon the idea that Donald Trump won't be found guilty of whatever the hell he's going to be formally accused of tomorrow. Think about that. That all of this is all secondary to Donald Trump's personal legal problems if he is found guilty of a felony, which would stop him from becoming president of the United States again. So I think a lot of people overestimated how much that bad boy aesthetic is going to help Trump. And as more of the indictment's information is shown to the public, hopefully those who are unsure will be able to come, hopefully those who are unsure and those who have been waiting with bated breath for more information will finally be able to come to some concrete solutions about this indictment. Turn Rikers Island into the New York White House? That'd be pretty funny. I've said this before, that I believe that we should do one of those, what's that? Oh God, I can't believe I forgot the movie name. The name of the movie with Jim Carrey, where, it's called The Truman Show. We should have a Truman Show situation with Donald Trump, where we tell him he can be president and he has been reelected president, but we just kind of like put him in like a big old box and have him pretend to be president, you know? He's not really president. We have him just pretend to be president in like a Truman Show type situation so we can see the type of stuff he would say if completely unrestricted by competent staff, right? How many invasions would he start? How many wars would he stumble into? How many historical misinterpretations and lies would he tell? How many times would he lie on camera after we've seen him? And the thing is, with this type of situation, we could see everything he says, right? So if he does one thing in private and says another thing separately in person, we would actually see it.